Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of season 2 of People Talking from a Social Distance. Last season, we talked to our colleagues around the building to help sort of build a sense of community while we were all apart from each other. And this season, we're doing the same thing. It's a new season, not a new premise. So today I have a fellow humanities teacher, one of my favorite people in the building, and a fellow jewel runner. We've got Luke Spicer with us today.
What's going on, guys? How are you doing?
So I'm super glad you're here with us today. I mean, we can talk probably for hours on some of the topics we're going to talk about today. So I appreciate you taking some time out of your day to sort of enlighten the rest of our colleagues of the conversations we normally have.
Yeah, great.
We got a couple different things to look at today, a couple different things to draw our attention to, and the first thing. One of us is still in the building. First thing I want to talk about is just history and sort of what drew you to it and why you decided to become a history teacher, and what continues to fulfill you in that profession.
So, I mean, I can kind of go back to remember wanting to be a teacher since I was like a 6th grader. My favorite teacher I've ever had was my 6th grade history teacher. And so the following year, also in some of my top favorite teachers ever was a history teacher my 8th grade year, and then also my junior year of high school. And so they drew me in because of how they would structure their classes, and for another thing, I was always terrible at math and science, so that just didn't compute. And so I ended up going with history. And what I love so much about it, and what I try and tell the kids, is something could come out in the next 5 minutes that would change everything we've thought about history for thousands of years. There could be some discovery, or something could happen in the middle of the day, like last week, and all of a sudden everything changes. And that's what's just fascinating to me. So.
Yeah, right on. I do think there's something to that. Like we're both humanities, but like your guys' stuff goes much quicker than the English and literature stuff, right? Like we're always like playing catch up, whereas yours is like at the moment. Is there a specific either type of history or time period that you either find yourself drawn to, or that you like really enjoy teaching about?
Love European history as a whole. Most specifically older, so thinking Rome, Greece, Middle Ages. Part of that was my 85-year-old college professor who would go smoke a pack a day underneath the library. She was something.
That's awesome. Yeah, I too find myself, in terms of literature, being drawn to some of those time periods as well. And then obviously all the postmodernism stuff with Vonnegut and all that. Yep. I think when we think about history, and you kind of brought up, things can change and things can move very quickly. I think that's a nice segue to move into talking about our shared love of some different genres of music. And again, another place where things move so quickly and change so drastically at the drop of a hat, I would suggest would be hip hop. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely.
So I often forget that there's an age difference between us. And so like my coming to hip hop was a little bit later in my life. Like when I was growing up in with the way that a lot of the mainstream 90s hip hop was, I was not drawn to that at all, right? Ludacris never really moved the meter for me. But like, how did you come to a love of hip hop, and sort of what were some of the acts or things that you heard that were like, that's what I want to listen to?
It's unfortunate now seeing how far he's fallen, but really my love has to start with Kanye. And he's totally collapsed, but one of my favorite things that a student actually came into class wearing a hat that said, make Kanye 2006 again, right? In 2006, I'm 9 years old, just kind of starting to get towards middle school. when he really blew up. And then 2010, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy comes out, which is unfortunately still my favorite album ever. I can't put it down. And so he's the one that really kind of hooked me.
Okay. Yeah. And I mean, as much as the human being Kanye might have some issues, the musical, right?
And
like,
always has had some issues, but
for sure. But you can't deny that like Blueprint 2 was awesome, right? When you hear like Reasonable Doubt and all that stuff that he produced for Jay-Z, you're like,
yeah. I mean, there is genius in there. It's just very all over the place.
For sure. I always ask when talking about hip hop, although you kind of already answered, but maybe you have a different East Coast or West Coast, because again, 90s kid.
Man, it's so tough. It's so tough. You know, if we're going there, then I would have to go with Biggie and East Coast. So, but I always show some Chicago love also.
I mean, yeah, and Midwest, got to have some sort of pride for your place. I mean, I love Common. I love a lot of the Open Mike Eagles. One of my favorite. He's a Chicago guy. But for me, it's East Coast all the way, right? You can't Wu-Tang, LP.
Yeah. Yeah.
Moving on. So obviously, our number one shared love of hip hop is Run the Jewels. I think
Absolutely.
anyone would notice that. How did you come to your enjoyment of Run the Jewels? Was it something like, so I was listening to Cancer for Cure and rap music, right? Because when those came out, I was like, all right, like this LP guy's got something. And then I was like, oh, and he's also with this other guy. And then all of a sudden Run the Jewels 1 drops and I'm like, oh.
Yeah, so I'm kind of the opposite. So I was like following Killer Mike around and then I was like, oh, and then there's this other guy, LP, right? And so we're kind of flipped there. And I had seen Killer Mike live front row at Pitchfork Music Festival. And I was like, wow. I mean, you know, he's this massive, massive human being. Grew up tough, Atlanta. And all of a sudden, you know, he's rapping hardcore lyrics. And then all of a sudden he stops the show and starts crying, talking about being nice to your neighbor. And I'm like, what is this guy? You know, like who is this person? And then all of a sudden Run the Jewels 1 drops, which I also saw live kind of in their first tour. I actually hadn't missed a Run the Jewels show until about a year ago, anytime they came to Chicago. So
well, and I guess I'll ask the other tough one for this. And I know what my answer is, but I don't know what your answer is. There's 4 albums. Which you can only pick one. Which one you going with?
I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think it might be this 4th one.
That's nothing to be ashamed of. 4 is it's a fantastic album.
With everything that happened this year, also, I just think it spoke so well to everything, and it happened. It came out before everything this year, which makes it even more amazing. I just thought it was awesome.
I would agree with that. I've been vacillating back and forth because like my favorite songs on 3, like 2 was when I just like the jump was made where I was like, this is my hip hop stuff now. Like this is where it's like, it's Run the Jewels 2 stencil behind me. Like, but 4 is good, man. Run the Jewels 4 is good. Those of you who haven't heard Run the Jewels and are like, what the heck are these guys talking about? Fantastic hardcore hip hop duo. Really, really amazing. Highly recommend.
You got to be ready for it, but yeah.
There's a great LP quote where he talks about the perfect beat is a combination of cuddling something and punching the hell out of it, and the cuddling is not necessary. That's like the perfect way to describe Run the Jewels to someone who hasn't heard it before.
And he's also said, because he's usually he's usually the one kind of coming up with the beats before Killer Mike hears them. He's also said, I'm just looking for beats that make my partner laugh.
Which again, just a fantastic way to approach a creative endeavor, right? To really speak to the two of them. again, I always say we don't plan these transitions, but there was a nice segue that you sort of put in there. And again, I think this is a place where we have kind of a different perspective. Maybe it's just the age difference, not to play that up too much. But concerts and festivals. I remember you talking at one of the Four Dubs discussions about wanting to go back to Bonnaroo, and you brought up Pitchfork. You're obviously really active in the concert scene, or at least were before everything shut down. Is there something about the live concert experience? Is there something specifically about the festival experience? Like what draws you to those things?
I mean, I've been going to concerts since I was, 6 months old. So I think that kind of, my parents were dragging me around everywhere. So I think that kind of, it's kind of rooted deeply within me. Now, I will say this, I used to hate festivals. I used to hate crowds, and I was not a fan, right? And it wasn't really till I dove in where I was like, oh no, this is awesome. Everybody here just wants to enjoy it. Now, if you're sitting there taking a video on your phone, blocking people's view, we're gonna have problems. But if you're just there to enjoy, what's going on around you with the people around you, it's that sense of camaraderie, and it's definitely been missed in this last year.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I've always been really interested in that. It's the term of liminal space. And I think I talked about it with Mike as well. This idea of we've all decided to disengage from outside society to all be present in this specific moment. And I do think there is that shared community, that shared energy, whether it's a concert, a festival, independent wrestling show. There's just something to a community coming around some sort of creative endeavor.
Yeah. I've only been to Bonnaroo once, but one of my favorite things to do is, I went with a large group of 15, but my favorite thing to do is just wander around by myself and just find myself in different places and situations.
For sure. Yeah. And so my experience with festivals was slightly different. The first festival I was at was one that I was working, had a go-kart or a golf cart and responsibilities. And one of my favorite things to do was to scare random hippies. That's the enjoyment I got out of it from the 10K festival. As the vaccine becomes available, what are your thoughts on concerts starting back up again? Do you think we're going to see them at all this year, or do we think we're still a year out?
I feel like we could maybe see some by August. It's so dependent. You hear, that the rollout hasn't quite gone as well as they thought, and it's a bit slower. And so it's so hard to tell. But even a concert where I can just sit away from people, that's fine with me. I just want to be there.
For sure.
Maybe I'm hopeful by August, but that's a hope. I wouldn't say it.
Nothing wrong with it.
I'm not very confident in that.
Were you able to did you do any digital concerts over this time, or anything like that?
Yeah, I did. I did one for Kurt Vile, another for Robbie Folks. I feel like there were a couple more others, but I can't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah, so I did the Mr. Bungle show on Halloween, which was cool, and then I'm considering it, even though I didn't have to pay for it. The Holy Kalama vote that's kind of a digital concert.
Yeah.
What do you think? I don't know. I was kind of torn. I was happy to participate and to help these musicians and artists continue to thrive, but I don't know. Something about it just feels weird.
Yeah, I have family members, kind of everyone in my extended family are big music geeks, and they love, pulling up some of the live shows from Lollapalooza and watching them there and, all that stuff. And I've never really enjoyed it. Sometimes it's cool. And, while some of the concerts that are recorded I'll enjoy, but very rarely. I was very happy to support the artists because they've been, doing nothing for almost a year now. But it's not really my favorite.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think part of that comes from like the tactile experience, right? The being able to have your senses all get immersed, and you don't necessarily get that obviously through a screen.
Yeah, the sensory overload isn't quite there.
Yeah, yeah, and you can try, right? Like, you know, your
Yeah.
head's right next to the speaker, but it's still just not the same thing.
Yeah.
But that idea of like the tactile, and I think is another place where we have some overlap, and it might not even be for the same reasons, but it ends up the same way. And I think that tactile, that like holding it in front of you, that sort of having something that's a physical thing, is probably part and parcel to our both loving vinyl. So I know like earlier in the week you were like, dude, check out, I got the RTJ4 vinyl. I was super jealous. I was when it first popped for like record day, or record store day, I was like, there'll be enough extras. It won't sell out, and then it sold out like right away.
Sold out in like a couple hours.
Yeah. I grossly underestimated how much of a response
it'll come back around.
Yeah, it'll get there eventually. So like, what is vinyl something you've been into for a while? Is it something that's a little bit more of a newer endeavor? And what drives you to vinyl?
I mean, my dad has a massive vinyl collection, and so I always have like kind of grown up looking at it and like thumbing through. You know, and when I was little, I would get like a vinyl per year, and I don't remember what some of them were. And so obviously I wasn't paying much attention back then, but definitely more recently, it's really started to take hold. And, you know, what's interesting is a record store near where we live in Batavia, Kiss the Sky, I'm sure some people are familiar. You know, they were all worried with the shutdown and, you know, how are you going to make anything? How are you going to hold on if you're a business? Well, what's interesting is he said, the owner, Steve Warnfeld, he was like, you know, all these kids then were home from college for months and they were looking through their parents' vinyls. And then they were like, I kind of want one of these, you know, I kind of want one of these little collections, however big or small. And so all of a sudden, you know, the new generation, which is kind of my generation, is now kind of looped into vinyl collecting and having the tactile thing. And obviously it sounds best. Love being able to pull it up on Spotify in 2 seconds, but it's not better than having the vinyl.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I've got, so like over the first stay-at-home break, I basically wore out my copy, and this is going to be the most old man sentence I've ever spoken. I basically wore out my copy of Yo-Yo Ma playing the Bach cello suites, right? And I've got it on my phone. I've got a digital version of it, but there's like, I'll start listening to it in my headphones. I'm like, let's just go back to the vinyl. Like it's just better. It just is.
Yeah, it's just better. I'm waiting, like you mentioned, I got the Run the Jewels 4 deluxe, you know, record store day, and gotta wait for the right moment to just blast it as loud as I possibly can.
Yeah, I recently got new neighbors. They are very confused between the classical music, the ridiculous hip hop, and then like the screaming death metal stuff. They're like, "What's going on over there? Like, don't worry about it. You're in papers." I think another thing we share in our love for music and creative things, I think we both kind of fall victim to a very focused fandom, right? You've talked before about Kurt Weill and your love of his music, and those who have had at least one conversation with me have heard me gush over another Kurt, Vonnegut. So I think we both kind of have something in our fandom, or our way that we approach these types of things, where it's like we zero in on artists or people, and we say like, this is my person, like this is who I like. Was that something that was sort of unintentional? You just found yourself there, or have you noticed that in other aspects of your fandom as well?
I would say I notice it even extended from fandom. I mean, my entire life, I'll just perseverate on a very, very specific thing for a really long time. And I mean, it's good and bad, right? It can be like a hyper focus on one thing, but if that one thing isn't productive, then that's probably not great. But yeah, I would say it's more than just the fandom and kind of everyday life for me. Um, this past year was definitely Kurt Vile, and it was unintentional, I would say, but still found myself in the same situation where I was just constantly like, I'm going to put on Kurt Vile. You know, this situation's good for Kurt Vile. I'm going for a run. This situation's good for Kurt Vile. I'm grading papers. This is good for, you know, and all of a sudden it's fitting into every category. So,
well, and I think I shared with you the screenshot of my 2020 in review on Amazon Music, and it was like Run the Jewels 1 through 9, and then like Bill Withers' Grandma's Hands, and then more Run the Jewels.
Yeah, right.
So I told it was the same thing where I was like, yeah, it looks like Run the Jewels again. Like,
yeah.
I think there's something to that though. Like you said, like hyper focusing in on something. I think there's a great, and I wasn't going to make it to a whole one of these without some sort of quote. There's a great Vonnegut quote which says, beware a man who spends a lot of time learning something, learns it, and finds himself no better than he was beforehand. So like knowing that you've been able to identify that you do this and that you've had this experience before, have you sort of been able to use that to your advantage in any way? Or are there things where you're like, I'm glad I spent so much time focusing in on something?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, definitely, you know, let's take it back to history. Sometimes it'll be like going down a rabbit hole. Well, this happened and this happened and this happened, right? Well, that's all productive stuff that I can now bring to the kids, or, you know, just a random conversation. Not that many people want to get into history conversations, but yeah, I would say it's productive most of the time, unproductive some of the time.
That's a nice way to split those hairs. That's good. I like it. Next place we're going to go is we're just going to do a little bit of some rapid fire. You came up with a great idea that I'm definitely stealing, but I appreciate you for doing it. From another podcast, and it's the idea. My opinion is fact, and so I'm gonna throw something out there, and we can talk about if we think it's overrated or underrated. I came up with a couple of them while we were sitting here talking. Hopefully they hit. This was unprepared, everyone who's listening. So if this fails,
but remember, our opinion is fact.
Yeah, obviously, right. Like I obviously know that I'm right, no matter what you're. So
right.
We'll start with an easy one. Superhero movies, overrated, underrated. What do you think? Because there's so freaking many of them at this point.
Now, if we're talking like Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, I'm going, even though they are universally loved, I'm going underrated. But if we're talking about Marvel and the whole 30 movies, now my sister and I watched them all, you know, this past spring, because I'd seen like half probably. I'm going overrated 100%. They're great, they're fun, but come on, they're so some of the writing, and they're so repetitive. It's so overrated.
Yeah, I would agree. There's when you can guess the formula within 5 minutes of the movie, there's something to be said about the writing not being there. But you delineated out Marvel and DC, and obviously we're not talking about the DC stuff now because most of that's been,
because that's even worse.
Yeah, but I do think like there is something about that Batman character and the way that the movies around Batman have been perceived, where there does seem to be maybe not so much for the Dark Knight trilogy because that sort of blew up, but those original ones from Burton for sure. There's definitely some underrated.
Yeah, and there's kind of that underlying like, you know, dark background. It's not all like happy-go-lucky. It's, you know, it has more of a dark theme than so many other superhero movies and superheroes.
One of my favorites essays by Chuck Klosterman talks about how we like Batman because he's a fictional character. If there was a, you know, member of the 1% who spent his time and money beating up criminals and people with mental illness, we probably wouldn't be okay with him. But because it's in a comic book, we're totally cool, right? And I always like Bruce Wayne's got all that money, right? And he's like, I'm not going to help the education system or mass transit or help my town get better. I'm gonna dress up in Bat cosplay. This is gonna be great.
Yeah. Yeah. No, maybe there's some good with taking crime off the street, but
second one hits home pretty hard for people, and I have a very strong opinion on this just in general. There seems to be this thing now where like fast food companies are like poaching each other on a chicken sandwich, and I believe that the Popeyes one was first. So overrated, underrated fast food chicken sandwiches.
Whew. I gotta say, that spicy chicken sandwich from Popeyes is really good. The guy I got this idea from, Dave Chang, he's a chef, right? And so he has his own podcast, which is where I got this from. And he has a TV show, and one of the episodes, it's on Netflix, called Ugly Delicious. One of the episodes is all about the chicken sandwich. And he kind of traces it back, the roots back to like Nashville. Now, those kind of chicken sandwiches, underrated. The fast food, I do, as much as I love the Popeyes and all that stuff, overrated. Overrated.
I always thought the Nashville chicken sandwich was weird though, right? Do you know the history of how the hot chicken sandwich came to be?
Yeah.
So the fact that for those of you who don't know, for the uninitiated, a woman found out that her husband was cheating, so she decided to make a chicken sandwich so hot that he would realize his error of his ways. And that became the city's dish of record, right? All of Nashville is basically eating a spite sandwich, and they're like, yeah, this is great. It just seems very, very odd. Last one I had for you, just off the top of my head, and I asked my students this just because I wanted to start some discussion between them. Has to do with animals that we often are told are just adorable, right? You only can pick one here, so it's a little bit different than over under. Okay. Otters or red pandas?
Ooh. I'm gonna go otters.
Yes, man after my own.
They just seem so much more playful. Red pandas are cute and fluffy, but otters just look like they're enjoying life 100% of the time.
It's a great description. Yeah, totally. They're just like, yo, I'm floating on my back, hitting some stuff on my belly. Let's do this thing. Yeah, I
videos of them in Yellowstone, and they're like going down 10-foot snowbanks, sliding right into the water. Like they're just doing, and then they run out and do it again. Like they're just having fun.
Yeah, otters are living their best life. We could all learn something from them.
Yeah, 100%.
So I've got one more place I'd like us to go before we leave. And again, I want to thank you for your time. I think we've sort of rambled through this, but hopefully people are getting some enjoyment out of it.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I always love to have people recommend something to their colleagues. We're all apart, although we're more and more back in the building, but we're still kind of not able to have as many conversations or get together as much. And I think a lot of ways that people can connect with one another is through shared recommendations, things that people have read or watched or listened to. So if you were to give a recommendation to our colleagues, something that you'd think this would be beneficial for people to have an experience with, what would it be?
Sure. So past year, I got really into reading. I've read more books this year than probably my last, 10, 12 years combined. Christmas, I got Dave Chang's book, which is all about mental health, his struggles. I mean, he's made it big, right? He's a chef that now has a huge brand and all that stuff, but severe mental health issues, that's great. The other book I got was Pappyland, all about the Van Winkle family. Now, if you're not familiar with bourbon and Pappy Van Winkle, it's very rare, expensive, all that stuff. That I liked even more. Has a lot to do with family, less to do with bourbon. Definitely would recommend that. I think my next book I might tackle is Fellowship of the Ring.
Nice.
And I would say Lord of the Rings, as universally loved as it is, underrated.
I mean Tolkien in general underrated, right? Like to bring it back to history a little bit. We're still reading his Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, like his scholarship over the Anglo-Saxon era and stuff like that is still top of the food chain stuff.
I mean, he started fantasy basically.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Is this first time through Fellowship?
Yeah, I have not read any of the Lord of the Rings. I've read Hobbit twice, but
Nice. I think you'll really enjoy it. Fellowship's a great book. That's a great series. I know anyone who's listening is like, wait, Dario, the guy that does sci-fi, is a Lord of the Rings fan? Who'd have thought, right? But great. And Pappyland, I've heard really good things about that.
really
So
good.
those are all awesome recommendations.
Yeah. I was not expecting that book to be as good as it was.
Nice. That's always a benefit. I actually just read one. It was the latest national book winner called Interior Chinatown, which is all about the way that Asian American immigrants are kind of forced into a stereotypical role, both within Hollywood and in life.
Yeah,
Fang
definitely talks about that in his book.
Yeah, I was like, it sounds pretty good. We'll see. And then I was just like flying through it, and I was like, this book.
What's it called?
Interior Chinatown.
Interior Chinatown. Got it.
Charles Yu. Yeah.
Well, my pen just broke, but I'll write it down at some point.
I know we kind of already preempted this, but again, I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for being on here. I had fun with this conversation, and I hope you found it to be enjoyable as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Hope you guys find our nonsense that usually happens on a daily basis at least somewhat interesting or of value. So I'll